Thank you for joining us today as we have Clara Bloom, and we are going to bring on Clara now. Thank you for joining us today, Clara.
Good morning, Ivo. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, excellent. We're live. Yes. All right. So welcome to the Grid Exposure Art, Tech, and Policy Days. This is day 3, and we have a fantastic festival program in store for you. Join Michael Sciarratta's workshop on sketching worlds in 360, hosted by Kodame. 01 is hosting Santiago X with an interactive experiences. Oh man, I don't think people can hear me. Ivo, are we sure that we're live? Are we live? Just a second. Okay, I'm just going to continue then. So 01 is hosting Santiago X with an interactive experience. Or join the Radical Simulation panel exploring artistic practice through the virtual space and world building, hosted by Gray Area. Lastly, there will be a live music performance, Golem by Arushi Jain and Carly Leif, hosted by Mutech San Francisco. Furthermore, part of today's festival program is dedicated to the intersection of artificial creativity, artistic practice, artificial intelligence, and policymaking. As the official AI Meets Music Garden Silicon Valley, Exposure is proud to have curated several events for this year's Ars Electronica Festival 2020. And we'll kick off today with the opening ceremony of the Ars Electronica AI Meets Music Festival, sort of a sub-conference within the bigger Ars Electronica Festival. In collaboration with the STARTS initiative of the European Commission, this year's second edition offers deep insight into the latest AI research and artistic practice. We'll commence the AI Meets Music Festival with an opening ceremony, including opening remarks, 2 AI music performances by the Center for New Music and Audio Technologies at UC Berkeley. After that, we'll have a panel discussion on how to tame technology and create a global framework for tech regulation, featuring distinct policymakers from Brussels and California, as well as trailblazing technologists and interdisciplinary artists. AI Performally Teaches Tsunami will play on the Spring Spire, and we'll wrap up today's contribution to the conference with a stellar panel on AI and literature. But don't miss out on tomorrow's panel discussion about AI and music featuring OpenAI, Google Magenta, and the Ars Electronica Future Lab. And now, without further ado, holding the opening remarks of this year's AI Meets Music Festival 2020, I'm honored to welcome the artistic director of Ars Electronica, a true patron of the GRID initiative and new media artists around the globe, Gerfried Stocker.
Hello, thank you very much for this nice introduction. I'm really flattered by the wonderful words that you found and humbled by it, but I'm even more excited about the wonderful project that Exposure and the GRID put together as part of the not only AI and Music Festival, but for the Ars Electronica 2020 in general. And I think before I start to say a little bit about AI and music, AI Meets Music, which is the very particular focus here, let me give you some idea of this very special situation of Ars Electronica 2020. It is by now the largest Ars Electronica festival that ever happened in the 41-year history of our festival, which is quite remarkable considering the very difficult circumstances. But what we learned, what really paid off, what really is the important basis for this is a large international network and many, many years of working together with partners all over the world, looking for common ground in the field of art and technology, of art and science, residence program with artists and institutions from all over the world. This gave us the basis to put together now not just a Ars Electronica festival, but a network of festivals. It's almost like if all these 160 partner institutions, partner projects that were joining us, as if all of them are putting together, staging their own festival. So it's really a network of 160 festivals. And even here in Linz, locally, we have a much larger program that we originally intended. And I think what this shows in particular is not just, how great we are putting this together and how great you are joining this with all your wonderful contributions, but how necessary and important it is, in particular in times like this, to stay connected. We don't need separation. We cannot deal with this desolidarization of our societies that is going on in so many places all over the world, no matter which continent you are looking like. It is art and culture to support the cohesion of society, seeing how much energy, how much effort has been put into this project from so many partners, how excited also the audiences are, how welcomed our programs and initiatives are all over the world, is, I think, really a wonderful and exciting proof for especially this very important quality of art and culture. And I think even so, when we think about the role of science, and this is where we come when we talk about the wonderful program of AI Meets Music, it is this collaboration with the science area, it is this collaboration with art and culture. And even for our science, there is nothing more important that people all over the planet staying connected, exchanging their ideas, their contributions. And there is this very nice word that we all heard already in recent years, that it might be an important strategy for the future to global but actual. I think this year we are all recognizing very strong and convincing way how true this concept actually is. And all of us who are now together for this 5 days, joining together, creating together this network of festivals, are doing exactly this. We are taking care of our local communities. We are inviting artists of our cities, of our regions, and we are connecting on a global scale to exchange this. And I think in particular, when we start to think about the role and the importance of artificial intelligence, we have, I think, all understood that this is no longer just an issue of technology and science. In particular, artificial intelligence is a matter, an important matter for all of us. It is a cultural and social issue in the best possible sense. And it actually has created a much broader interest of many, many audiences, people who are not participating in the discourse of new technologies because they think this is complicated, I don't understand it. They have their opinion about artificial intelligence. And I think this is very good because it's a movement in a certain way that is democratizing technology, not only the way how we talk and think about technology, but even more so an important thing how we're going to apply these technologies. But of course, before we start to really apply technologies, sciences, we need to better understand it. And I think this is, again, where art really comes in place and has an important role. As a field of investigation, as one of the few areas in our society where we are focusing in a very strong and intense way on the value of the humans. We're often hearing now this term digital humanity. And I think this is much more than just the humanities using digital tools. It's a new approach to make sure that these technologies are not only serving the industry, but that they are really serving each of us. And when we think about, again, artificial intelligence, one of the very important things that are going on here is that we are shifting from the age of automatization, which is the clear paradigm of the industrial age, and has been most of the time still the paradigm of our early digital age that we have. Everything we did with computers before, we are now doing with computer. But when we look into this new era of machine learning and artificial intelligence, we recognize that there is a new quality appearing, which is autonomization. And you don't even need a very intelligent system and technology to make it autonomous, to give the system autonomous decisions. And autonomy is a really great word because it consists of auto and nomos, which means acting in your own name, acting in your own law. And so I think one of the most important things is to avoid that we hand over responsibility. Not only handing it over to technology, which would be very stupid, or to handing it over to artificial intelligence, but anyway, giving away. There's a very, very nice quote from the French president. He said, there's one thing that AI cannot do, that only I can do. And this is taking responsibility. And I think this is true for all of us. And by exploring the intersections of art and artificial intelligence, we can also explore the possibilities, but also the boundaries of the technology, but also of us as human creatures, as human beings. And in particular, when it comes to this very important question, what is left for us humans? Is creativity something that is really, truly only a human nature? Or can machines also be creative? Then we start, of course, to think about creativity itself. And when we think about creativity, we recognize that this is a very important driving force for society at large. We need creative people to challenge the society. We need creative people to make further developments that go beyond what we can see right now. And all these things is in the focus of the programs of artificial intelligence meets music, AI meets music, of this wonderful program that is so nicely and strongly supported by the European Commission. And I'm very happy that Roberto Viola is also with us in this meeting, because he is actually the true mastermind of this program. It was his initiative. He gave us this challenge and said, you know, why don't you think about a program that is really bringing together music and artificial intelligence? And now in the second year of this program, we have really a lot of fantastic activities. Just yesterday evening, our time here in Austria, we had a great performance by Ali Nikrang, who developed an AI system to compose music, and he invited musicians from different countries and areas, cultures all over the planet, from chamber music to folk music to experimental music, and they all were improvising with the music coming from the AI. And at the end, it was really a wonderful concert. The audience liked it very much, and I hope all of you will like our program as well. Thank you very much for your attention and the time that you gave me to introduce our program.
Thank you so much, Gerfried. As always, you set the right tone. It's very inspiring to listen to you. I'd like to introduce another person now, our second guest, but perhaps some context. With the great exposure, we want to envision innovative ways to connect the worlds of art, tech, and policy, so that through this regular dialogue, we might envision new ways to positively shape technology at its core. And Roberto Viola is Director General of DG Connect, the Director General for Communications Networks, Content and Technology. It's the European Commission's arm, largely responsible for pioneering models of tech regulation, where both the EU and California are seen as a global standard setter. So, but beyond that, Roberto has championed the STARTS program by the European Commission because, a gifted pianist himself, he has an innate understanding of the inherent value of the arts. And he sees the boundless potential of bringing artists together with technologists, because artists can work as communicators, investigators, futurists, propagators, and storytellers. So through the STARTS program, he has become a strong advocate for interdisciplinary models of collaboration between those silos that we work so hard to bridge: art, science and technology, and policy. So here today with us to hold the second keynote for the opening ceremony of this year's AI Meets Music Festival 2020, Roberto Viola. Welcome.
Thank you, Clara. Good morning, San Francisco. Good afternoon, Linz. It's really a pleasure to be in the opening panel And I think, Clara, you said it all, and Geoffrey said it all. So my speech could be very short, but I'm really pleased to be with you and pleased to be in two places at the same time. Well, actually, in none of those places, but virtually in these two places. This is the magic of digital. But of course, let's not forget that being in person and exchanging and having feelings and seeing real faces is very important. In San Francisco, there will be a music performance, which I'm really looking for, from the Berkeley School, and a panel on taming AI. And this panel will reflect on how arts can help to make digital technologies closer and more centered to the humans. And you already said it. And I think this really complements nicely the ideas of the AI and Music Festival. This festival explores how AI can be a friend of music, and how music can be the friend of all human activities. And that's a bit the idea we have for AI. And all the reflections we might have on AI are now very timely, I must say, because, I mean, AI now is part of our life, and more will influence the way we work and interact. And we have questions like, will AI respect our privacy? Will we keep control? Will we understand the algorithms? And that's why the European Commission has reacted to all these important concerns and put together a regulatory framework for data protection that you well know. It's called GDPR. And of course, is looking now at other issues around AI. But one thing is clear, we cannot regulate what we don't understand. That's why much more research is needed in explaining AI, in explaining algorithms, and in making sure that transparency is there. The world, and this is the reason why we're all here today, must put forward the idea of human-centric AI. A pure technology approach is something we don't want. And I think, frankly, it's insufficient. And as Geoffrey has said, it's something of the past. Human-centered for us means, having technology at the center of human activities. In particular, making sure that the user can trust and accept what comes out of artificial intelligence. And this idea that humans and artificial intelligence can interact together will be a bit the leading song, if you like, talking about music, of how we should develop AI in society and the economy. We have put together all these ideas in a white paper, which we published just before the pandemic in February. We had thousands of responses to the public consultation, and I really thank everybody in the world that contributed. And we are trying to develop these twin ideas around AI, excellence and trust. We need much more investments in research, but we also need to understand how to create a trustworthy environment. That's why we have worked very much with the top-level experts in the world and created a framework of self-evaluation for companies and people that would like to understand how AI can help instead of being an antagonist. And of course, when we look at art is the best friend of sustainable development of technology. An art-driven approach will help reaching everybody in the world. Art allows us to understand better technology. We have invested in the past, and we have really pleased of the partnership we had through the years with Ars Electronica, because bringing art and technology together, I think it's the most simple and clear expression of human-centered future. And this brings me to the AI and Music Festival. 3 years ago, when with Geoffrey, with other friends, we kind of decided that this was a crazy adventure to enter in. Actually, Ars Electronica was already a little bit experimenting the idea of using arts and especially music as a signal. And I remember that time, the title of the festival was AI, the Other Eye. And this continuous quest for finding the interaction between arts and humanity led us all together to have this passion to develop something a bit unique in the world, which was at that time the first AI Music Festival. And I must say, scientists have always been fascinated by music. Alan Turing, the godfather of artificial intelligence, or the father, as you like, created the little machine that could replicate 3 melodies. And of course, musicians likewise like to play with AI. The AI and Music Festival that we are having explores this fascination of scientists and musicians together. It invites to listen to musical works. It also invites to listen to AI, to the algorithm. And this is really, the way we put creativity and technology together. I must say that recent studies have shown that musicians quite like AI. And they think it's a kind of a new instrument in a way to play with. And music is the ideal laboratory to explore the relationship between AI systems and humans. And this we must continue. And last year, we did a bit of a glimpse when we heard the 10th Bruckner Symphony completed by AI. But was it just completed by AI? Well, actually, very skilled musicians have to take by hand AI to make sure that the orchestration would support what AI had composed. And the result was really interesting and in a way breathtaking. Maybe, not because we can say everything is top level like Bruckner would have composed, but this idea that you can really have a fusion between artist and music and algorithm was quite something unique. And frankly, I think the first solid concrete application of AI, we are of course already seeing in many, many professional applications, but it's in music teaching. I think in music teaching, AI can allow tutors to actually go with pupils in the journey of music. Of course, nothing replaces hard work and really a difficult path to learn an instrument. Pupils should not be fooled. But at the same time, teaching with AI will be much more interactive. The performance that is immediately after this introductory session, it's from the Berklee School of Music. And the initial idea was actually to be something that would have been of the cell phones of people being live. But we can also enjoy it in streaming. And here is the idea: internet as the resonant body for music. This is also a reflection that I like to make with you. And the role of internet in diffusing all sorts of music. And it's a little bit what is at the center of this idea of time in tech. And we reflect the impact of technologies in our society when, you look at the fusion of AI, internet, music coming from all corners of the world. And independent of the practical goals of what we want to achieve with this festival, I admire the magic around this. I admire the capacity of Ars Electronica to organize this festival online. And I admit that I will really miss the presence and I will miss the magic of the San Florian Monastery. Last year, we heard in the monastery spectacular performances by artists. And let's really hope that next year we'll all be in San Florian, again, listening to the magic of music. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, 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 hello.
Our apologies for these technical difficulties as we work on Clara's sound. We are doing our best here to make sure that we get you a wonderful experience today. And we are going to be bringing in our performers. Clara, I think we hear you now.
Okay, is that true? Test, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I just heard you. Yes, I like that. I like the sound of that. So let's go. Okay, excellent. Well, hello everyone. Sorry for those technical glitches. The 21st century has some hiccups in store for us, but we're alive, we're connected, so let's go. AI meets music. I'm delighted to introduce to you Edmund Campion. Edmund is a professor of music and music composition and the director at the Center for New Music and Audio Technologies at the University of California, Berkeley. So hello, Edmund.
Hi, good morning, Clara.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing mediocre given that we have a 300 count air quality here. So happy to be locked inside. Thank you.
Right?
And thank you for that preview, just to show everyone that we are live. Yes.
Very good. Very good. I haven't opened my window in like 4 days because it's truly toxic apocalypse. I'd also like to welcome Steve Adams. Hi, Steve. Steve is a composer and a seasoned performer on saxophones, flutes, and electronics. Hi, Steve.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Wide awake, ready to go.
Okay. Excellent. So we're very, very excited about your performance. CINMAT is featuring 2 performances for this year's AI Meets Music Festival 2020. What a treat. The first piece, Cry, is performed by an improvising saxophonist, Steve, who interacts with a computer system simply by playing his instrument. So Edmund, you're the composer of this piece. Could you tell us a little bit about it and how it works?
I sure can. Before I do, I just want to thank you, Clara Bloom, and the Grid Exposure for the invitation to be a part of this really exciting and important thing for CINMAT as well. And I want to shout out to Mauricio Suarez Ramos at the Ars Electronica, the AI Meets Music. We're thrilled to be a contributor, and we believe very strongly in this relationship between music, technology, and science, and the very things that are being discussed in this festival. So thank you, Roberto Viola, also for an excellent introduction. Finally, I want to reach out to the crew at CINMAT who has worked so hard in the last few days to make this possible, and that's Jeremy Wagner and Brendan West. So thank to both of you. Now about Korai. Yeah. Regarding Korai, this project is quite a lengthy one. It has been going on since the year 2000. It started at IRCAM with a large production there, and became more and more a collaborative project and ongoing thing at CINMAT here at UC Berkeley campus over the years. It is a legacy project, and in that sense, it is more concerned with a relationship between a seasoned professional musician and a machine. And the mode of communication is the signal, and the signal is listening. So we have machine listening, and we have a saxophonist who does what great musicians always do, which is include the body and the feedback mechanisms of the response of the computer to help the machine do better. And of course, the system, given its age, is flawed, and it always has been flawed to some degree. And that is also a part of our cultural picture as well, and continues to be, and one we have to be careful about. But in music, if you build in the error, as Thelonious Monk taught us, then you know that musicians can deal with it. And that's exactly what Steve Adams does. So this relationship, basically, the machine extracts every possible detail that we know that audio signal contains, and that can become either a proto-language between the saxophonist and the machine, or it can be a misunderstood communication, because the machine listens in microscopic detail in ways that humans can't, but it can never hear the saxophone really. And so it is up to the human to mediate the entire experience. And so I thank Steve Adams, who has been playing this piece for many years now, and he, in a sense, he carries that responsibility. Whatever happens, he has to deal with it.
Well, that's really sounds like a task for an absolute pro. Fascinating, Steve. So I wonder, how does a professional musician like yourself converse with a computer, deal with all this chaos to create aesthetically pleasing music?
The story I tell about this piece is that the first time I played it, at that time I had a son who was 5 years old, and it was very much like asking him to do something, like, would you bring me my shoes? And he might bring me my shoes, he might bring the newspaper, and he might decide playing with Legos was more fun. So, the computer is very much like that. Sometimes there are a series of cues I play which are supposed to bring in different elements of the program. And sometimes they work, and sometimes they decide it's a good time to turn on, but from something I didn't realize was a cue. And sometimes they just don't turn on for some microscopic thing that I'm doing that I didn't realize I was doing. But the many years I have as an improviser helped me to deal with whatever the electronics turn out to be in any given performance, which is always a really thrilling and exciting experience. It's a really fun piece to play.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. That sounds incredibly fascinating, and we can't wait to listen to this now. Mm-hmm. Ivo, I think it's time that we present Korai. Wow, this was breathtaking. Beautiful. Really, thank you so much to Edmund and Steve. Thank you for this wonderful treat. We have another performance in store from Sinmat, the second contribution to the AI Meets Music Festival 2020. I welcome percussionist and composer Andrew Blanton.
Hello.
Hi, Andrew. Good to have you on the live show.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thank you so much.
It's our pleasure. So, Andrew, you're a PhD student working closely with Sinmat and an associate professor in the Cater Media Labs at San Jose State University. I'm really fascinated by your piece, Waveguide, and also especially in the context of this current pandemic. You're here today to perform Waveguide that you composed, but this work was initially conceived to send data from drums on stage to a remote server, and then through the audience's cell phones in real time, using the network infrastructure of the internet as a resonant body for the drums. So I wonder, Andrew, how did you adapt this piece to the pandemic-induced state of isolation? Was it even possible?
I don't know. I mean, it's really interesting to see how pieces sort of evolve and change over time as the context changes, right? And so when we had initially started formulating the idea for the piece, me and my collaborator at the time, Yvette Granada, and I started thinking about this idea of like, well, we're all sort of locked into these screens all the time, you know, and this is forming our perception of reality, and how do we understand the world through these screens, and they're really creating these sort of blinders that are taking away the rest of our understanding of the world. And so we wanted to use that as an impetus to really build a performance piece that could have a synthesizer within that. And it also was working for a piece of distributed audio. So instead of showing up to a music venue and having to install like, 40 small speakers, we were thinking, well, if everybody's walking around with one of these, $1,000 computers in their pocket, why not leverage those to create something interesting? So the idea and one of the concepts of a waveguide is that you inject noise into a set of delay lines, and then by changing that delay line, you can change the pitch of sound. So by sending data from my drums to like an Amazon EC2 instance and then back into the audience's cell phones, I was trying to get like a resonance out of the internet as a resonant body, for sound, and then talking about sort of the role of AI in our lives and the role of these small computers, this ubiquitous computation everywhere in our lives, sort of thinking critically about that space. But what ended up happening was that the internet was really efficient, and I wasn't able to get so much variation. So I ended up building in variation and building in these sounds. Well, that turned into a synthesizer that was based in the web browser. And the synthesizer, actually, I'll ask everybody, the audience, to go to andrewblanton.com /node.html during this performance. We were going to do it live at Sinmat, but because of the smoke, it sort of threw a hiccup into our whole plan. So I'll be sort of controlling myself today as something of an avatar as you see it, but hopefully I'll be able to still perform the interactive web elements for you as well. So I think, yeah, you can see the address there. Again, andrewblanton.com /node.html, and that .html component is important. And if you see a white page, you might have some firewall restrictions. So you can try a different network or a network through your phone. But yeah, it should work. We'll find out. Should we try it?
Yes, this is exciting. Let's do it.
Should see a bunch of triangles as well as a sound that comes out the browser. So we'll get started. Thank you.
Good morning. I hope everybody can hear me. I would like to welcome you. This is day 3 of Exposure, Art, Tech and Policy Days. We're in the middle of the AI and music parts and in for a very special treat as we are today discussing what is at the core of this festival, Taming Tech. This is a panel where we will discuss the results of a workshop, and I will go to that later, a workshop on the intersection of art, tech, and policy making. And what would happen if we break up the silos of those 3 areas and bring artists, policymakers, and technologists together in order to create a framework for a better technology? That was the question which we asked ourselves 2 days ago as diplomats, policymakers, and technologists and scientists. And last but not at all least, artists, in order to tackle some of the increasingly obvious challenges, but also opportunities as a society. And I'm just getting a message now that the sound might not work. Could I get some message if the sound is working now? Okay, so I can hear, I get a message that I can be heard. That's excellent. So I would like to just again set the framing. My name is Martin Rauchbauer. I'm the Austrian Tech Ambassador at Open Austria in San Francisco. And I would like to welcome you in the Bay Area and also in Linz to Taming Tech. We want to deliver a global framework for humane technology. This is, as I already said, part of the AI and Music Festival. In reality, our approach is much broader. Over the next hour, we're going to discuss what we can do as diplomats, policymakers, technologists, scientists, and last but not at all least artists, in order to tackle some of the increasingly obvious challenges, also opportunities we have as a society with technological developments such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, surveillance, our global media networks and their effects on our political systems and institutions, as well as what does it all mean for our human agency and dignity. So our goal here in this next hour is to discuss the right conditions for a humane technology. But we also, and in particular, want to look at the role and potential of artists and art in all of this. What would happen if we manage to break into these silos between artists, policymakers, and technologists, bring them all together and create a framework for a better technology. This is what we discussed in this workshop that I already mentioned ago. And the workshop was designed by a number of important institutions, the Center for Humane Technology, Open Austria's Art and Tech Lab, the Grid, which is behind this festival exposure, Ars Electronica in Linz, and we are today live to Linz, and also Beaux-Arts in Brussels, and it was supported by the wonderful STARTS program of the European Commission. I want to say just a word about STARTS. It's driven by the conviction that technology combined with an artistic viewpoint also opens up valuable perspectives for research and even business opportunities through a holistic and human-centered approach, just as we heard before the Director General of DG Connect of the European Commission, Roberto Viola, mentioning the role as of art as a catalyst. So we want to discuss the findings of the workshop today and have gathered a fantastic panel where we bridge Europe and California, Silicon Valley and the arts, policy making and technology. And I would like to welcome our first panelist, Asa Raskin. Good morning, Asa. And I hope we can hear you as well. Asa, you're a writer, an entrepreneur, an inventor, an interface designer, and you're the co-founder of the Earth Species Project, as well as the Center for Humane Technology in San Francisco. You co-designed with us together this workshop. As I remember our first discussions with Clara Bloom, our festival co-director, and you, and when we envisaged Taming Tech at the end of last year, which was of course pre-corona. So my question would be, what was your intention then with Taming Tech, and what were the main questions you wanted it to address?
Thanks so much, Martin. It's such a pleasure to be here, wherever here may be collectively. We are living through the climate change of culture, which is driven really by our digital infrastructure, which is inhumane because it's unsafe on any screen. We're forced to use digital infrastructure, which is extractive to us for the things that we need. And we're starting to face we're already in some very unprecedented times. Where technology is increasing its ability to cognitively dominate us. There's a kind of accelerating human hackability that we're feeling from all corners. Everything from CRISPR on the biological side to the intense amounts of extremism, polarization, mental health issues, loneliness epidemics. These are all things caused by our social operating system, our digital infrastructure. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that human beings are, in a sense, persuadable. We could create the conditions in which our values are aligned with the incentives of our systems so that we can, have an extant species, because all of the biggest problems that we face are these kinds of collective action problems. But instead, our information environment, because it's optimized for surveillance capitalism that is stealing as much data about us as possible to build models about us that then leads to behavior capitalism, where our behaviors and our psychologies individually and at scale are manipulated and exploited for profit. What we have is a kind of unfettered, deregulated capitalism powered by massive supercomputers controlling massive persuasive environments, strip mining us for our data and conditioning our behavior. We need a new kind of protection for human agency and dignity. I got asked this question a while ago by a friend, like, why is it that modern cultures systematically abuse farm animals? And the answer is, I think, very simple. It's the market conditions says that those companies that exploit, in which those cultures which exploit animals for resources are the ones that outcompete the other cultures. Which are the companies that make up the most profitable companies in human history? Oh yeah, they're the ones that give away a free product, which means we're the product. They're the ones that are using us as human resources to exploit. And where we're looking for in this, the intent for this workshop was, this is a hyperobject. This is a hard problem. It's the scale and size of climate change. When human beings get hit with an object, a systematic problem this big, we sort of freeze in headlights. We don't know what to do. But each one of us, especially in technology, in policy, and in art, have been climbing up a hill. And from top of that hill with that particular expertise, we can see parts of the landscape, but we can't see the whole thing. So the point is, if we can learn how to talk from one hilltop to another hilltop, from tech to policy to art, so we can all speak in language that is shared, we can actually see the whole picture and make change. Fundamentally, this is a question of who do we want to be as a species? The power of our technology is now so strong that the values that we give it get written on back onto our society. It's starting to have the hand on the pen of history more so than culture or other driving forces. And that question of who do we want to be is the question that artists are best able to help us see, right? We think we've been looking into mirrors, but we're actually looking into as a funhouse mirror that we think is our screen. And it's worse, it's a one-way mirror, it's a lying, surveilling mirror. And what we need are real, true mirrors, which are artists reflecting back who we are and who we want to be. So in the end, the intention was to build the relationships, let us talk across our different hills, and set up a framework in which you could actually create the conditions in which comprehensive reform can happen. Like this, tackling the surveillance and behavior and attention capitalist markets. The only way we're going to do that is not by individual piecemeal legislation, but by something sort of like the Dodd-Frank Act in 2008, sweeping reform to protect parts of us that have never been under attack before and are so clearly under attack now.
Well, thank you, Asa, and also thank you for this beautiful metaphor of the three hilltops where artists, policymakers, and technologists stand, and they all have a partial view, but the attempt of Taming Tech is to get a full picture, and that's a very beautiful metaphor about the role of artists. But I want to bring one artist/researcher onto the panel who was actually also part of the workshop, Prima Vera De Filippi. Welcome to our panel. Prima Vera, you are a research fellow at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University and an artist, and you participated and even co-designed some parts of the workshop. What were your main takeaways?
Yeah, hi. It's very difficult actually to summarize everything that has been said in this workshop just in a few minutes. But I think like the main gist of it was really that we need to redesign our technology to be more responsive to human needs. And I think, again, like there was a lot of discussion around this question of like the analogy with climate change and the question of whether can we really get rid of technology? Of course not. We live in a society in which we actually can also see the positive aspect of technology. And so there is always this question of how do we solve the problem that technology has caused, and can we solve this problem with the technology, or do we need like some kind of regulation that limits the impact of the technology and so forth? And I think like as a general discussion, there was this question of is the answer to the machine in the machine, or whether can we patch the technology with another layer of technology, and do we actually think that it is going to resolve the problem? And I think like it's interesting to look at the analogy again with climate change, in the sense that it's not about creating technologies that will fix the problem that existing technology are creating, but rather we want to invent and develop new renewable energy So technology that are different, right? So when we think about we need to solve this problem, it's really about not patching, not finding ways to accommodate and patch and fix the problem that technology is causing, but actually more radically think and strike at the root of the problem and try to identify what kind of different technology can we design that will be more responsible. And there was also a lot of discussion around the question of, so what is the real problem? Is the problem actually the technology in and of itself? Or is it the people that are actually behind the machine, right? And what is the real source of the problem? And the idea, of course, that technology itself cannot really be the solution to human problems, because those technologies are created and are controlled by humans, and so the only real answer to those technological issues are actually generated by humans and can only be resolved by humans. And that's where all this question about policy and about art and culture come about, where the technology is an instrument, but first and foremost, we need to actually hit on the cultural level, because we need to show and we need to educate and we need to bring people to the awareness that their current habits, their current choice on how to interact with technology are actually problematic. And that's where art and policy can help. And art, especially because art is really this kind of what is really shaping the culture, and then policy come later to endorse what the cultural existence actually is. And so then there was like the discussion about like how do we bridge all those things together? So we have technologists, we have artists, we have policy makers. How do we converge? And it's interesting because there is already quite a few tech artists, but we definitely don't have a lot of policy artists. Yet we had one at the workshop, which was fascinating. And I think we really need to encourage more artistic creativity in policymaking as well. Like trying to push the boundaries, trying to really take risk and be creative and do something that perhaps is not the most conservative manner of solving the problem. And the same way, there is a lot of policymakers that are thinking about technology and technology regulation, but there is yet not enough technologists which are thinking about policy. And we need to figure out ways to create better communication between them. And just to conclude, I think like what's really important, it's easy to find those bridges between policy and tech and art and policy is already a bit more difficult, but really finding platforms in which the three of them can actually communicate with each other is actually fundamental. And I think this workshop was actually really successful in finding the common language between those three different groups and creating this cross-pollination that can actually inspire the work of each other.
So we need radical solutions because there are some serious issues that we talked about in the workshop and that we also will talk about a little bit in this panel. And we need artists because they basically shape cultural values, which is one aspect that you said. I would like to ask you a little bit more about the role of artists and reacting a little bit to what was said earlier in the opening remarks by Gerfried, this power of artistic thinking and coming up with solutions also to technological problems. The art is catalyst between these two worlds. So can you talk a little bit also about the role of artists concretely in those different processes?
Yeah, I actually have a strong opinion on that because I'm trying to play that role personally. I'm an artist, but I'm also a lawyer, and I'm also somehow a tech geek. And so I've been like all my life during my artistic practice, I've been trying to use art in order to, because I'm a legal researcher on like technologies that are appearing, but yet we need to understand prospectively how do we regulate them and what kind of policy can we draw around them. And so all my artistic practice has always been to bring something that is almost there, but is not there yet, because no one has actually brought it into life yet. And yet it's extremely important to start thinking about it now in order for being able to understand and have a more constructive policy around them. And so to me, the artist has an incredible advantage, which is the artist is actually free from constraints, in the sense that the artist can actually do things and push the boundaries of what's possible. It can innovate beyond anyone else because it is not bound by specific constraints. So for instance, an engineer is bound by functionality, right? So if I'm an engineer, I need to make things that work, that are functional, that are scalable, and so forth. And so there is a limit. Like when there is a new technology that comes about, there is a limit to what I will be able to do as an engineer, because there is a lot of things that will fail, and so I will be limited in my actions. In the same way, if I'm an entrepreneur, well, of course, I can experiment with technology, but I'm constrained by this concept of return on investment. So I need to make sure that whatever I do will be commercially viable. And so obviously this limits a lot the type of innovation and the type of experimentation that an entrepreneur can do. Policymakers or lawyers, of course, they are bound by this concept of, well, what the law can do and what today, and how the law can evolve in a way that it doesn't practice. So there are all those constraints that are kind of limiting the realm of actions of pretty much every sector, except for artists, because actually artists, their only constraint is to do something that doesn't exist yet and that doesn't really make sense yet, because that's what makes them avant-garde. And so in my artistic practice, I do a lot of research on blockchain technology, and so I try to bring into life what might sound like science fiction when we discuss it, but by actually creating an object and that people can interact with that object, then people can immediately understand what it is about, because they see it happening in front of their eyes. And all of a sudden, then it becomes very easy for policymakers, for lawyers, etc., to actually understand the issue without having to dwell into the complexity of understanding how the technology works. And at the same time, those things that are being made by artists can also inspire technologies and entrepreneurs, engineers, to move towards in that direction, because they saw that it's actually possible. They wouldn't have done it themselves because it's too risky, but once it has been shown and it has been experimented and the artist has pushed the boundaries of what's possible, then it creates this type of inspiration towards the others. So to me, like, the artist is kind of, in terms of innovators, the artist is the one that can push as the most extreme whenever there is a new technology, show what is possible, show what is not possible, and on the one hand, help entrepreneurs and technologies to actually be more radical in their innovations, and on the other hand, help policymakers foresee and envision beforehand what are the possible evolution of a technology, and start understanding through the art, but also predicting or preparing at least the ground for those type of technology. Once they will be implemented by the tech world, how should they be regulated?
Wonderful, Primavera. I think this idea of no constraints for the arts is a very beautiful thought. And we now actually have two policymakers on the panel, and I want to introduce the first one and talk about the kind of constraints policymaking faces, but also the kind of opportunities there are to shape technology in the right way. One of the things we wanted to do in this workshop is also bridge the two continents, Europe, California, Europe, and Silicon Valley. And I would like to welcome now Eva Meidel, who is a member of the European Parliament. Welcome to the panel, Eva. You are a Bulgarian politician and member of the European People's Party fraction in the European Parliament. and you work there on digital industry startups, and you've also recently been appointed as a coordinator and speaker of artificial intelligence. What is, in your view, the European approach to taming tech, so to speak, and where do you see possibly also a role of the arts?
So first of all, thank you very much for having me with you today. I hope the connection is good, because I've heard that a couple of times it has cut down. If there is a problem, just drop me a message, please. Well, the European perspective. So I would use just a few words to try and describe where we are at the moment, or perhaps where we've been trying to get over the past couple of years. I think the most important thing is that the European Union sees tech not as a goal by itself, but in a way as an enabler for society, an enabler for industry, an enabler for our environment. Speaking of industry, for example, where we are traditionally strong, we would like to see more enhanced collaboration between tech companies and industry that develops in a way and embraces tech in order for it to be more competitive, in order for it to serve better consumers, and in order for it to create a better economic environment for Europe. But in order for us to do that, we've understood that there has to be trust in the technology that's being used, whether that technology is being used to reduce pollution, whether it's solving a societal problem, or is making industry more competitive, or where simply a customer is using and a consumer a certain technology herself. So that's why we want to see trustworthy, when we speak about AI, a trustworthy AI, a technology that basically works for our citizens. In practice, that would mean that we will work towards increasing the trust of ordinary citizens, not necessarily the ones that are tech savvy in technology. Because over the past couple of years, new technology has developed very fast, and citizens have not got acquainted so well with the way this technology has developed. And I don't personally think they have to know all the details, just like if policymakers are supposed to regulate, they don't need to be coders before that. But it has to be done in a way that there's trust. And what I mean is, again, it's not about citizens, being scientists themselves, but when in a certain product there's not enough trust, this is when citizens back away from it. And if certain technology has been used to produce that product and to enhance it, then citizens will be not so trustworthy towards this sort of technology. And this also creates issues and problems for policymakers. Because I know that today there are a lot of bright minds that are working on a software, for example, to reduce CO2 emissions or so on. But yet this very good product, for example, or software, it could have flaws. It could not provide the correct image or whatever because of biased data, for example. And this product might end up being either banned, or consumers themselves might not trust that product, even though it could create very good result tackling a certain problem. So in this way, it often happens that the trust in citizens could be diminished in this technology. And it is, as I said, not just the company or the producer or the creator's problem. It is also, in a way, a policy issue. It delegitimizes, in a way, all efforts of policymakers to bring on board tech solutions that can help us emerge healthier, or can help us emerge cleaner, smarter, and more efficient, for example, after the COVID-19 crisis. And so this is why we engage in various projects. But a project that has been already mentioned and discussed also by Martin, is the STARTS project. And I think it's a good flagship for Europe, where we combine our two strengths. On the one side, the scientific strength that Europe can provide, and on the other hand, our excellence in culture and our excellent artists that we have. We do that because I think in Europe we believe that market potential of technology depends on the capacity to inspire basically the user trust, and thereby ensure acceptance and uptake of the technology by society. And so what STARTS does is combine those very good scientists with tech people, with the ones that are more rational, the ones that follow algorithms, with the creative minds and creative society. I think it's a good start that we are already looking into that direction, that the European institutions are also involved, but of course there has to be more work done in order for us to better bridge this different, sometimes even very different worlds, but different fields that would need to collaborate in order, for example, for EU's perspective on tech to be realized, or at least to get closer to realizing it. I remember that 5 or 7, 8 years ago in Europe, we would be talking about how we want to make sure that our governments are basically more technologically advanced by enabling the so-called e-government systems. And in some countries that has been done very successfully, like Estonia, but not only. And back then it took citizens such a long time to use those possibilities offered by the government, which would ease their lives, save time, they're more transparent, etc., because they were not trusting it at first. Well, now we're at the point where there's so much technology around us that if citizens do not trust it enough, they don't believe that it's enough trustworthy that they could buy it or use it, it could impede the development of societies and of our economy as well.
Wonderful. Eva, very, very important, the issue of trust, to regain the trust, to gain the trust, to maintain the trust of our citizens. Trust also is an important element for innovation in itself, as we know, and of course the role of artists. Maybe they have a special role in gaining trust. They are a trusted mediator. And I want to discuss this now on the other side of the Atlantic with another policymaker that in some ways has been engaged in legislation that in some ways runs parallel to a lot of European efforts. California State Senator Bill Dodd in Sacramento. I would like to welcome you to our panel.
Thank you very much, Martin. It's really great to be here with all of you and these great co-hosts, and for convening this very important conversation.
Thank you, Bill. I would like to just simply mention before I let you say something, that you also introduced as an author the California Consumer and Privacy Act, which is a legislation that in some ways mirrors the efforts of the European Union and the GDPR in privacy legislation. So my question to you would really be, we heard Eva talk about the important role of regaining our trust of our citizens, and that art maybe could be an important mediator there. When you look at Silicon Valley, your constituency is the northern San Francisco Bay Area, so very close to Silicon Valley. And a lot of great things have come out of Silicon Valley, a lot of really world-changing technology, but there's also a lot of anxiety now in our societies, and Asa mentioned it at the beginning. There's a lot of unease with some of the technologies that have come out with. And so how do we address this, and as policymakers, and do you even see a role for the arts there?
Well, you know, one of the things I took away from Primavera already is I absolutely have to become a more artistically creative policymaker. I frankly had never considered that before, but I can certainly see how those worlds do intersect. A lot of, what I say a lot about politicians and policymakers were jack of all trades and masters of none. But yet when something comes our way, as important as this policy is, we have to become more educated and reach out. And I think the mountaintop analogy was, really, incredibly astute. And frankly, that's what we did with Alistair McTaggart, who I think is, in the United States, has been the one major force that has created the ability for us to be able to have something, get this bill passed, because he had an initiative that came forward. That initiative was something that industry was very, very concerned about, but yet, we have our constituency that, obviously needs to be protected. We heard, that at the beginning from Asa, and so it's something that the hybrid of being able to have that initiative, being able to work with the policymakers, me and Senator Bob Hertzberg, Assembly Member Ed Chow, we were able to work together, bringing these people together to try to do a better job.
Thank you, Bill. And I think what is very, very clear is that there's a lot of activities going on between Europe and California, a lot of similar efforts when it comes to shaping technology, maybe even taming technology. And I think one of the outcomes of the workshop was also certainly that we need to include the humanities. We need to include art thinking and human-centered technologies into that discussion, and bring some of the efforts that are happening in Europe together with a lot of the efforts that are happening anyway in Silicon Valley, so that they reinforce each other. But I would like to now bring in another aspect of policy making and welcome to the panel the Vice President of European Government Relations at Microsoft, and a former colleague, a former career diplomat, and the first tech ambassador of the world. You used to be, until the beginning of the year, the Danish tech ambassador. So you were engaged in tech diplomacy, bridging a lot of issues between your country, between Europe and Silicon Valley. And now you are kind of on the other side with Microsoft, which is a big and important global leader when it comes to regulating technology, when it comes to bringing human rights into the discussion. And you're now based in Brussels with dealing with a lot of European efforts shaping artificial intelligence. I would like to make your take on our discussion so far, that there needs to be something done, that there are a lot of challenges. Asa named them at the very beginning, a lot of anxieties, of course, that politicians are dealing with their citizens. But then there's also hope. There's also this idea of humanizing technology through the arts, of bringing in the artists into the research labs on the one hand, into maybe even policy-making circles on the other hand. What do you think a big company like Microsoft, that certainly is a leader on the front of research and development on many fronts, could do about that?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Martin. I don't know if the sound is working here. I'm dialing in from a very small hotel room in Rome. So apologies both for the background and also the sound, but it's a pleasure to be here. And let me also just begin by congratulating you on your own new position. I think it's so important that we have more European countries doing what you're doing, Martin, and I'm really proud that you're carrying forward the work that we were involved in the past. Listen, I think, listening to the conversation, I think one very, very important aspect of what has been said so far is, a degree of humbleness, regardless of what part of the side of the table that you represent. I have made the transition going from government to the private sector. I think I've taken my values and my views with me. And I do think that even before COVID-19, but certainly also after COVID-19, it's crystal clear that one of the important responses to COVID-19 and an important response also to the recovery is going to be the use of new technologies, digital platforms, etc. And I think that raises the bar for the kind of responsibility all of us will have to show. And I think also that applies for a company like Microsoft. It's one of the reasons, it's no secret that I joined Microsoft, because ultimately I believe that it's a company that has shown a way forward in terms of leadership and acknowledging the kind of influence we have, and therefore also the kind of responsibility we have for making sure that privacy is upheld. I would even add sort of human rights, fundamental democratic values. It's something we have to make sure that we protect with our technologies and with our platforms. And I think one of the ways of doing that is in fact, what you're doing, Martin, and I think what Asa, Bill, Primavera, but also what my very good friend Eva mentioned before, and that is to make sure that we have bridge builders on all sides that understand the opposing views, and making sure that we bring those views into our conversations. And fundamentally, I'm a very, very big believer in sort of multi-stakeholder approaches to everything we do, whether it's some of the difficult issues that we're facing right now. Cybersecurity, unfortunately, is something that will not disappear. Governments can't do it alone. Private companies like Microsoft and others cannot do it alone. We have to make sure that we really collaborate in a multi-stakeholder and multinational framework. And similarly, I think when we talk about the role of arts, again, what I would say is that I do think we need to bring to the table a lot of humility and also a lot of acknowledgement that ultimately this is about trust. Ultimately, it's also about making sure that we have transparency around the new technologies, that we adhere to sort of the trends, the concerns, the opportunities at the same time. Because one of the interesting questions I get all the time is, it's horrible in Europe how dependent we are on these new technologies, not least as we try and respond to this global pandemic. And I do also, as a European, really understand where that's coming from. The only thing I would say back is, can you imagine a world where we didn't have access to 21st century technologies? It would have been very difficult for us to respond in a good way. I think, unfortunately, more jobs would have been lost. We're looking at perhaps 60 million people becoming unemployed in Europe. I think those numbers would have been higher did we not have the technologies that we're using all the time. But I do think the flip side of that coin is that we have to invest even more in the responsible application of new technology. So that's one point. The other point I would just say, again, referring a little bit to what Eva said as well, we talk a lot about this sort of geopolitical arms race on technology between the US on one side and Asia or China on the other side. But I actually do think we often forget the role that Europe is playing. Europe is perhaps not a global superpower in terms of scaling technology companies, but I think Europe is a superpower when it comes to setting the guardrails around technology on the regulatory front, creating new policies that is really focused on core European values. So one thing we launched just a few weeks ago was, in response to European Commission's Europe Fit for the Digital Age vision, to say that we as technology companies have to make sure that we have technology fit for Europe that is really a solution provider to where Europe is sitting. And I don't think that's a small thing. I think it's about mindset, and it's also about aligning with what people are concerned about, what citizens are concerned about, what artists are concerned about, what civil society is concerned about. So that's why I think this conversation is super important. And thanks for inviting me to participate.
Thank you, Casper, for providing us with your insight, which comes from your past and also your present, and the emphasis on bridge building, and of course the role of Europe. So I want to bring you now all speakers to the panel and ask a question to you. We heard now about the concerns that are out there of what some aspects of technology has been doing when it comes to privacy, when it comes to exploitation. We also heard a lot about the opportunities of technologies and the creative role that artists can have. We heard a lot about trust. But now I would like to ask all of you, what can we actually do? We really had this ambition when we started the workshop to come up with concrete solutions, tapping into the potential of artists, but also tapping into the potential of breaking up those silos of these three separate worlds. Maybe I will start again with you, Asa, but feel free to jump in, all of you, because the question is really addressed to all of you. What can we concretely do when we want to approach the issues that we've just heard about together? I think you need to unmute.
Another example of technology silencing us. One of, I think, the most hopeful examples from the past that I know is tobacco, especially here in the US, where it wasn't messaging about tobacco being bad for us that finally created the political will to change. It was that the tobacco companies were lying to us. It was the hypocrisy of that manipulation that eventually switched sort of like collective will to do something. And I think it's very, very telling that none of the top executives in Silicon Valley companies let their own children use the technology, right? You could imagine that we have some legislation that says, hey, if you're going to make some piece of technology, at the very least, we're going to force your kids to have to use it too. Sort of it sort of binds the hands to make sure that the people making the thing are feeling the pain of what they're creating. And what I liked about yesterday's discussion is that it sort of spanned from the small, which is let's increase the amount of transparency that the radicalization engines of YouTube, Facebook, et cetera, have. That is to say, make sure that they are responsible and have to publish the amount that any one piece of content is amplified, to sort of mid-level solutions, make sure that Facebook, Google, these social graphs are interoperable, that other companies can build new interfaces on top of them, to the incredibly large, which are saying we need fundamentally new kinds of human rights because our technology has a new sort of cognitive dominance that can override ours. And so we need to have we're not allowed to be modeled or have our technology personalized, or just outright banning of surveillance capitalism and these kinds of unfettered, deregulated capitalist markets that are strip mining us for our own information. So I think it's really easy to get sucked back into these smaller frames of it's about personal relationships with technology, when really we need to be thinking about these large-scale economic reforms that changes the fundamental incentives by which these platforms are built.
So you're saying we need to change the business models in some ways. We need to change the biggest structures and systems. And then you're also alerting us that sometimes the best way with dealing with some of the problems of technology is just not using it or staying away from it in some ways. That's one of the things we discussed in the workshop. Any other ideas? Would anybody like to react to what Asa just said? Maybe I'll start with you, Primavera, and a little bit to you as well, the question, what do we need to do in order to bring those three worlds together to work on viable solutions?
Yeah, so to me, I was actually very happy because after the workshop yesterday evening, I managed to see the Social Dilemma movie, which made it like a perfect cherry on the cake. And I started thinking about all the discussion we had during the workshop and things like that. And I think this is there's this very difficult thing in creating human-centered technology, which is that on the one hand, it means that we need to understand humans in order to actually create technology that is centered around them. And on the other hand, the people that actually study humans, they also need to understand technology. And this is also a very difficult discussion and communication to have. And it seems that right now, the few people that actually have both of those skill sets that understand humans and technology are the ones that are using technology to manipulate, like the persuasive technology people, right? So it is possible, and actually the fact that we have this dominant cognitive monopoly of those technology over our mind is actually due to this, like the understanding humans and understanding technology together can create something very powerful. And if only we could actually get those skills on the opposite side of the fence, trying to actually create technology that, because we understand humans, we also understand how we can actually design this technology. I think that will be a very important key. And a second thing, so that's one thing, and the other one that also came out within the discussion in the workshop is the idea of, again, like how do people, like how do individuals actually get to hook off those systems, right? And it's really difficult because they are really addictive, because we actually love what they are giving us in spite of being fully aware of, well, not everyone is fully aware, but even those that are fully aware of the problems, they still get hooked because of the benefits. And so how do we actually create a culture around that, and how do we actually create these like social norms by which, whether it's related to privacy or whether it's related to like human agency and so forth, but basically how I should be aware that using those technologies is actually harming myself and is actually impinging upon my own privacy. But I should also be wary, because having my friends or anyone within my social network using those technology is also affecting me negatively. And so I should have a say. And in the same way as we have like the secondhand smoking, in which people are saying, please don't smoke next to me because it is affecting me, we should feel entitled to actually ask people around us, please do not use those platforms, because by you using these platforms, you're actually giving all my personal data to those platforms as well, right? And so in that sense, we can create perhaps a very strong cultural norm, social norms against the use of those technology, which is not just enforced by ourselves, because it's very difficult as an addict to enforce our own decision. But when we have a social norm around it that are pressuring us, and when we're pressuring others about not using those technology. And I think like the key is probably like personal data, the idea that when you use those technologies, you're sharing collectively data that is not just your personal data, but is the personal data of all the people that you're connected with. I think that's a very powerful tactic to try and at least try and reduce the use of this technology.
So those are very concrete proposals. Maybe I will turn to the policymakers, both within tech as well as within governments, sharing data. Also, how do we change our underlying culture? I want to pass that on to first maybe Casper, and then also give our two policymakers from Europe and California a go. Casper.
I had hoped to come last here, but I will try and give it a shot. Listen, I actually, one thing I forgot to mention before, Martin, and it goes a little bit back to what Asa said, and also Primavera. I think actually what you guys are saying is a little bit being the canary in the coal mine. I think you represent sort of where society is heading, and I think that's where arts and civil society plays a super important role, and why, you know, big technology companies and executives need to listen. It's interesting when I go to Copenhagen and have lunch or coffee with my mother and ask her, are you more concerned about technology today than you were 5 years or 10 years ago? I think the answer is absolutely yes. And you know, my mother perhaps has an age where she's not sort of the generation that are super comfortable with technology in the first place, but I think the debate is in a very different spot today than it was even just a few years ago. And one of the reasons is, of course, some of the major scandals we've seen with data leaks, with misuse of personal information, you know, disinformation, interference in elections, etc. And I think that has raised global awareness of the fact that these technologies are not necessarily neutral. You can use them for fantastic things. And I really want to emphasize, I think it's also important that the discussion doesn't flip in a direction where we sort of fail to see the opportunities, including in rectifying social injustices, trying to make the world more inclusive. But it has certainly raised awareness that we have to make sure that technology is not misused. And I think that's a shared responsibility. And I want to come completely clean in saying, that's something I think, the company I work for has said very clearly from the beginning. My boss, Brad Smith, had made this, statement several times and saying, we have an enormous responsibility in making sure that what we roll out on our platforms, that adheres to the highest standards in any way, form. But I think we need to continue listening. I don't think I've met Asa, but I've followed the work of you guys from the very beginning, not least when I was in the Bay Area. And people might think that there is sort of a contradiction in having conversations between big technology companies and the work that you guys are doing. I think nothing could be more wrong. I think it is super important that we try really to understand where this is coming from, and then that we try and become operational and concrete. Because one of the problems with this sort of human-centric approach to technology is that I think we need to drill down and become very concrete and very factual about what does that mean. First point. The second point, I'll promise to shut up, is that I think inside big technology companies, and I'm a newbie here and I'm a newcomer in so many ways, I think it's fascinating to try and help make sure that we bring these discussions into not only among the executives, but also among the engineers that are building these new technologies and new platforms. Because I think it's so much more difficult to change something that has been built rather than trying to sort of mainstream these thoughts in from the very beginning. And I think this multidisciplinary approach is something we have to focus on as we move ahead.
Maybe I would like to ask now our two policymakers. You've heard the discussions centering around some of the issues of our underlying culture, but also very concrete issues with business models of some big tech companies and some solutions looking into access of data, maybe also solutions bringing artists into the research R&D labs, and what Casper really said, concrete solutions, breaking down these general ideas and also criticisms in order to come up with viable solutions. Where do you, Senator Bill Dodd, stand on these issues? Do you feel that policymakers are often too reactive, that they are too late in the process? I think that policymaking can also interfere earlier into some of the issues that are at the moment worrying our societies. I think you need to unmute.
You would think by now I would have that down. But anyway, I think you make a great point there, Martin. We hear all the time when we try to pass, put out new bills in this area that we're stifling innovation. And that is something that really gets a lot of senators and assembly members over in the other house. It gets their attention right now. Silicon Valley, and when I say Silicon Valley, that's the, that's really the macro of all technology and companies that's come out of there using that technology will come in and not really try to fight the policy itself, but just to try to backdoor it, if you will, and just say, if you do this, you're stifling innovation, and this is going to make it impossible for us to ever get to the end game, which we want to get to with technology, which is to help civilization, blah, 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 blah. And I think that that's something that is critically important, that we absolutely have to kind of just push that back. I really appreciate Asa that the opportunity to be able to work with technology, with all these different frankly, you've given me new insight just on this platform today in terms of what we should be doing before we start getting legislation cooked, if you will, and start talking out, reaching out to technology, reaching out to the arts and other platforms.
Thank you, Bill. And we have only a few minutes left, so I would like to ask Eva. I know you were a bit in and out due to some technical issues, but the general question, when it comes to solutions and what you have heard in this panel, what can policymakers do?
Well, so first of all, apologies for perhaps all of a sudden the bad connection I've been facing. My team kept me up to date with some of the discussion as I was on and off. But a couple of things, I think, I mean, I can speak for myself and speak for the whole European Parliament, but at least from where I see things, what we've tried to do over the past couple of years is be in constant contact with different spheres that could have a stake at the legislation that we are preparing or the legislation that might be upcoming. For example, you mentioned that I'm the speaker on the new AI committee for the fraction that I represent. Well, we're not planning to have any legislation yet, and perhaps there might be no legislation during this mandate, speaking particularly for AI. But what's very important is to use that time to gain more knowledge. I think that I am not an expert, but I try to understand and get to know as much as possible from as many as possible representatives of different areas that could broaden my knowledge and an understanding. Because I have to say that, you know, and I'm a firm believer that regulation can create innovation. And when I say that, I don't mean that we should regulate absolutely everything, because very often when we create certain type of regulation, we can in a way stifle innovation if we do not understand what we are regulating. So yes, indeed, Europe is a regulatory, in a way, superpower, where it understands it has to come in and set the standards straight, like in data protection, for example. But I think we need to take a little bit our time when it comes to the fast, you know, developing technologies for us to better understand them and not jump into very quick conclusions. One could argue that sometimes we've been delayed with legislation, and in this way, the trust of citizens have become lower in a certain, you know, product or in a certain technological development field. But in the same time, it is a well-known fact that institutions are reactive very often and slower. So one thing I would like for us to see is to open up, not to think that we know best, and to create more spaces and ways for policymakers to interact. And this is why, you know, I'll go back to that STARTS project, because I think this should not just be a flagship that we have to advertise and say this is a great project. We need to be way more involved in order for us to understand. And it's a different type of policy making, I dare to say. And many of my colleagues are perhaps not familiar with that way of operating. But I think only in this way we could actually make sure that we deliver on the point of protecting citizens and consumers, but on the other hand, being able to create innovative and new solutions. So I hope
I think we have to unfortunately wrap it up now. We have to unfortunately wrap it out now, but there's very, very important points. We need to all open up. The STARTS program, a fantastic way to go. Also, of course, the grid has really that as its intention to bring together and open up these different types of policy makings, internal as well as external, as well as bringing artists into the research labs as well as into policy making. There was a great panel. I want to thank you. Good evening back there in Europe, and also we're kind of in the middle of the morning here on the West Coast in California. Thank you so much all for your time. I think there were some very, very important discussions that made us advance in this quest of taming tech, bringing together art, policy making, and technology in search of a humane technology framework. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us.
Step right too fast. Turn left, stop.
Hi, Letitia. Great to see you. Everyone, Letitia Tsunami is a sound artist, performer, and researcher based in the Bay Area. And she's been working and designing her own instruments for many decades. We're very pleased to have her here as part of the Grid Exposure and the AI Music Festival. Letitia, welcome.
Yes, well, thank you, Vanessa. Yeah, here.
So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your instrument. You spent many years playing with the Lady's Glove, an instrument of your own design. And I believe it was about 8 years ago that you created the Spring Spire. Why and how did you build it?
Well, so I used the Lady's Glove for about 25 years. And I think through all these years, I think my ideas about instruments and about control and about performance changed somehow. And also I felt like the Lady's Glove, I could have used it many more years, but I think I had reached a point where I felt like I knew what it was about. So I was curious to start completely new and completely new slate, because the instrument that you make somehow guides you in a particular in an unknown direction. So I was very eager to explore. And so I took some of the features from the Lady's Glove that I thought had been interesting and worth implementing. And then I decided to also implement machine learning, because I had tested it with David Wessel in the 90s, but at that time it was very cumbersome, and it was very complex, and just a big machine. It was just, not an easy solo artist touring system. And also I had met Rebecca Fiebring, who at that point was in Princeton, and now she's in England at the University of the Arts. And she had designed a machine learning, she had created a machine learning software called Reckonator. And she demonstrated it to me in like around 2012. And I thought, well, this is very interesting. So I'll make an instrument based on what she had shown me the software could do. So then I just started. It took a while, like the instruments, for me, instrument design, exactly with myself. I mean, with a lot of input from friends and people, but it's not like I go to a lab and say, build this. So it takes a long time. I started with a lot of different prototypes until I got to this particular one, which also could eventually change. But for now, that's what it is.
So something that you write about and you talk about when you're discussing the Spring Spire is that you've trained it to never learn, which is a very different approach to using AI in music. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the concept behind the instrument?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I trained it to never learn, but I definitely made sure it would not learn correctly. So it's interesting to train to not learn, but at the end, this a bit. I mean, I think the not learning was definitely at the root of the system. And the reason is that I think that when we build instruments, I mean, obviously, if you want to do very particular data analysis or data projection for whatever applications that people work with in AI, then I can understand. But in my case, I really wanted to create an instrument that let me explore some kind of unknown territories, or in this case, it's like synthesis. Some kind of with the glove, I had mapped it so that it would do certain things when I bent the finger, when I move the wrist, and all these things, and I could create all these relationships. But I kind of knew what it was doing, and what ended up being the most interesting is what it did that I was not really in control of, because I had to adapt. So create an instrument that would some kind of go a bit in unknown spaces and force me to adapt and respond was something that I was very interested in. So that's why I use the springs. It's kind of a chaotic system. So the feature extraction is done on the audio that's generated with the springs. But as you can see, the springs kind of like go and they rest. So this ability to somehow go into unknown audio, unknown sonic spaces was something that I was very interested in. And it's one of my, one of the issues I have is I think that we often, as artists, musicians, at least, there's been this whole idea of controller. You build controller, and because you have a perfect idea, and you're gonna make sure that the controller does what you want. And I think that is great if you have great great ideas. I don't have great ideas, so I'm always hoping that the machine is gonna, bring me somewhere a bit different, because I'm not very interested in having the machine do what I wanted it to do, because I think that that's not what, for me, that's not what art is about. It's about some kind of exploring territories that we cannot really fathom.
That's beautiful, and it makes me think about some of the more interesting ways that people are talking about how they use AI in creative practice. So, you've talked a lot about the sense of the unknown, and in some ways letting yourself be shaped by this practice, and your practice kind of responding to that. How do you think that these kinds of tools, machine learning tools and AI, will shape the future of creativity, or more specifically, the future of music making?
I think it's just one more, system that musicians use. I mean, if you think of it, music has been shaped by the machines that we created. I mean, not always, but a lot of like what we have created, comes from the machines. And so I think that in this case, AI will just be one more system that will allow us to go to certain elements. I think that one of the things that maybe it will allow us to do, good or bad, is that it allows us, I mean, it's one of the probably most efficient way of mapping, to do mapping. And mapping, at least in the music that we create now, at least digitally, is like a very big issue. Like, how do you control systems based on particular data? So whether it's just a fader or a knob, or it's a very complex system. So the fact that machine learning can use very large amount of data input to control, a large amount of output, without this does this does that, this does this, but creating a much more, kind of a global control. I think that would allow us to some kind of link more to other data extraction systems. So, for instance, we could maybe much more easily map, world events or environments, or which people used to do with like a little light sensor or a humidity sensor. But now I think we can really map large systems to other systems. That I can see is probably one, for me at least, one of the interesting features that would allow us to connect worlds. We can connect different worlds in a much more complex way.
That's great. And then, are there any ideas that you have, or recommendations or wishes that you have for, based on your experience, how you would want people to integrate these systems or use AI in creative practice?
Well, I always hope people are not going to use it to control. I mean, I think the whole idea of control is just so passé. But I think that people really want control, and that's puzzling. It's like you find it on all layers of society, the desire to control. And I think that in my case, I would hope that people who look into AI go into much more opening it up to some kind of unexpected, results. And so, that's one of the things I would hope, is that don't use AI as an afterthought, to use it as the building, block for exploration. Not like, oh, you did your whole thing, you have all your ideas, and now I'm just going to implement AI so that I can control all these things. I would hope rather, like all machinery, all machines, all tools that we create, see what it can do and open it up to unknown spaces, So that's something that I think I would really recommend. Now, there's a lot of other issues with AI that I, obviously, like a lot of machines that we use, I think have implications, that do you close your eyes to this idea of AI as being, somehow, again, very prevalent in society to extract data and control, society. How are women and AI? How does that relate? How is like all, the relationship AI to, to again, control of people's life. So it's a question I have. I think that I haven't really explored it enough at this point and how to implement it in the work that I do. But I would kind of like think, how blind can you be, use a system that has a lot of different applications, and you can go, well, no, I'm just using it to make cool sentences, No, it's, so that's a part that I'm still, questioning on how to relate to the furthest, broadest implication of using.
Great. Well, I think that's a thoughtful and provocative note to end on. So thank you very much for your time, Letitia, and looking forward to the work that you create with the Spring Spire moving forward.
Yeah, thank you.